So when I was a kid, I had a fascination with the Bermuda Triangle. I mean, the countless unsolved disappearances that have happened in this little stretch of ocean honestly makes it one of the most mysterious places in this world. But what I didn't know is that there is a location that is very similar to the Bermuda Triangle right here in the United States. And it's actually like only a 6-hour drive from my house. I'm not going, by the way. I'm not trying to die. Now, this place is a deeply wooded area in southern Vermont that is now known as the Bennington Triangle. Now, it was dubbed this by English author Joseph A. Citro, who gave it this name thanks to a slew of mysterious disappearances that happened from 1945 to 1950. And to this day, these disappearances have yet to be explained. But before we get into the disappearances, I want to first talk about the land itself. Now, it's said that Native Americans hundreds of years ago refused to settle on this land due to them believing that there was some type of curse surrounding the land. And it's a belief that people still believe to this day, and honestly, rightfully so. I mean, throughout its history, there's been so many unexplainable, mysterious things that have happened. Now, these strange occurrences include obviously the disappearances, but also other things like UFO sightings, Bigfoot sightings, navigational failures, and even recently a plane crash. I mean, already this area is sounding like the little brother to the Bermuda Triangle, and I'm loving it in a weird way. Is that bad to say? That's probably bad to say. On November 12th, 1945, a hunting guide by the name of Middle Rivers had taken a group of 4 hunters out into the Bennington area. Hey guys, just realized that his name is actually Middie Rivers. I didn't have my contacts in when I was filming this, so my bad. Now, the 74-year-old Rivers had reportedly gotten ahead of the group of men on a trail called Long Trail. First of all, I love the name. Do you think when they named it, they were like, man, this trail is tough. This is a really, oh boy, it's a long one. And the other guy was like,
say that again.
Also, pretty crazy that a 74-year-old man is a hunting guide. I mean, like, yes, part of me stands, but the other part of me is like, maybe it's time to take it easy. Now, as Rivers pulled ahead of the group, that's when he seemingly, out of nowhere, disappeared. So the hunting guide kind of breaks off from the group, trails ahead, maybe to see if there's some game. I do not know if that is proper hunting terminology. I think it is. Now, at first, not too many people were too worried about Rivers due to the fact that he had extensive knowledge of this area and the fact that he was a hunting guide, like he knew his way around the wilderness. But these feelings soon changed as the days turned into weeks. There was still no sign of Rivers. Now, a thorough search of the area was conducted, and the only thing that turned up was one of Rivers' rifle cartridges that had been found in a stream nearby. Now, it's widely believed that this rifle cartridge had just fallen out of his pocket as he was going to get some water from the stream. And other than that, nothing else suspicious was found anywhere near the area. Rivers had seemingly vanished into thin air. I wonder if they questioned those 4 hunters. Like, those are your 4 suspects right there, in my opinion. And due to the fact that they needed a guide, maybe they weren't the most experienced hunters, or maybe even the most experienced with guns for that matter. Mistakes happen, but nothing must have come out of this, assuming that none of the men were ever charged. Now, just over a year later, on December 1st, 1946, a freshman by the name of Paula Jean Weldon had ventured out into the woods by herself. Not a good idea, but although she was not with anyone, there were still others in the area, including one man who had actually given Paula directions to the trail that she was looking for. That trail being Long Trail. So already there's our first kind of correlation between the two. I'm still upset about the name though. Is there a short trail? Freaking got him. While on the trail, an elderly couple was walking roughly 100 feet behind Paula Jean Weldon. What is with elderly people in the woods? At one point, the couple watched Paula turn a corner and go just out of sight. When they turned that same corner, Paula was gone. She was never seen again, and despite multiple searches, neither Paula or any of her belongings were ever found. Paula was the second person in a year to vanish without a trace. I got a theory. Grandma did it. Those elders, I don't trust them. Now, several theories have been offered as to what happened to Paula, one of which being that she moved into the mountains to become a recluse, and another being that she actually ran away to Canada to be with her boyfriend. And although these theories are interesting, there would still be some trace of her. I mean, you can't just disappear off the face of the earth. Even back then, it just seems so unlikely. And due to the history of this whole area, I think we're dealing with something much darker than a recluse here. Exactly 3 years after Paula had vanished, an old man named James E. Tedford was on a public bus heading towards Bennington. He was seen sleeping on the bus at the last stop before Bennington. As soon as the bus neared the Bennington stop, something went very wrong. During this bus ride, Tedford disappeared. 1 minute he was there and the next he wasn't. His luggage was left on the rack and his bus program laid open on his seat. And what makes this so interesting is that from the time he was last seen to when the bus stopped at Bennington, the bus hadn't stopped once. So how could Tedford have disappeared off a moving bus? And it's also worth adding that there were 14 other passengers on the bus at this time, and every single one of them came forward and testified that they had seen him on the bus at that last stop heading towards Bennington, and nobody reported seeing him once the bus stopped. Another key detail is that on the bus's route that Tedford disappeared on, the bus had passed through the Green Mountain Forest, the same forest that's included in the Bennington Triangle. And no trace of Tedford was ever found after this day. And out of all the disappearances that I'm going to be talking about today, this is the only one that didn't happen in the woods. Like, they were passing through the woods, but it wasn't in the woods, you know? So this leads me to believe that this situation could be a total outlier in all this, but it really just adds to the mystery of the Bennington Triangle. The fourth disappearance occurred on October 12, 1950. An 8-year-old boy named Paul Jepson was left unattended by his mother while she went to feed their pigs. So essentially, in a way, this mother chose pigs over her son. In a way, take the kid with you. Paul was left by his mother's truck in a wooded area close to the spot that Paula Jean Weldon, the second victim, was last seen. When his mother returned roughly an hour later, Paul was nowhere to be seen, and no trace of him has ever been found. You left for an hour? Kids wander. Kids do stupid stuff. You know what kids don't do? They don't stand still. They don't stay in one place. And they sure as hell don't listen to directions. Due to the suspicious nature of Paul being left in the woods by his mother, many believe his mother was the one responsible for killing him. And the reason his body was never found was because his mother had fed him to the pigs. But despite this theory, no arrest was ever made. I will say this, the mother is responsible in this situation. Whatever actually happened, even if she didn't kill him, even if she didn't feed him to the pigs, she is responsible for this happening. I mean, you don't leave. Now, another theory is that he ran off and maybe he fell, got injured, and was eaten by something. I mean, we're talking about the wilderness here, so there are scary animals out there. And others believe that Paul was actually kidnapped, which is corroborated by the fact that bloodhounds tracked his scent but stopped abruptly at the edge of the highway. You got this little boy wandering around, gets to the edge of the highway, gets in a sketchy van, and F in the chat. Wow, that was extremely disrespectful, and I'm sorry. Now, just 2 weeks after Paul's disappearance, a 53-year-old avid survivalist named Frieda had fallen into a stream on the Long Trail. Here we go with the Long Trail again. Did I mention that I don't like the name? Oh, I did? Frieda was hiking with her cousin at the time, while her husband was back at the campsite, just half a mile away. Frieda decided to turn back and change her now-soaked clothes before she and her cousin continued their hike. On her way back to the campsite, she disappeared. A huge search effort was made, which included the Coast Guard and the Army, and yet nothing was ever found of her. That was until 6 months later, when her body turned up in an open area, an area that was searched multiple times before. Now, this case, in my opinion, is one of the most important because it is the only disappearance so far that an actual body was found, but it was found in extremely unnatural circumstances. I find it very hard to believe that a search team would have missed a body in an open area like this. It doesn't really make sense unless the body was put there afterwards. Unfortunately, the body was decayed so badly that no cause of death was ever determined. And to this day, her death remains a mystery. So I've already said, I think somebody planted that body there, which points clearly to this being a murder, which leads us to our first theory, and that is that the victims were killed by a serial killer. Maybe there was some person who would wait in the woods and stalk, abduct, and kill people. Though this may sound unlikely due to the fact that only one body had ever turned up, that doesn't totally rule this theory out. Perhaps someone would abduct these people and take them somewhere else and dispose of their body in a completely unrelated place. thus explaining why more bodies were never found. There was even a drunken confession from a man at a local bar who claimed that he knew where Paula's body was. However, due to the fact that Vermont didn't even have a police station, the investigation was a mess and the man was never charged. Perhaps he was the serial killer responsible for all these tragedies. So they didn't even really have a police force. They had to bring in other police investigators from other states just to handle this case. And by the time those guys got there, it was already a mess, as was the case with all of these disappearances. Now, however, there are flaws with this theory, like the fact that there was no correlation between the age and the gender of each one of the victims, which is normally a telltale sign of a serial killer. And the fact that there weren't any correlations basically rules out any clear motives. So if someone was killing these people, it would seemingly be for the sport of it. Now, the lack of motives and the lack of bodies found does kind of point to this theory being somewhat unlikely. Nobody can commit 5 murders perfectly and leave no shred of evidence at all. I mean, that just doesn't happen, does it? And so with all the evidence against this theory, it has led people to point to something more supernatural. Which brings us to theory 2. Alien abduction. Okay, quite a jump, I know. Alien abductions would explain how these people seemingly disappeared without a trace, and it might be the only explanation for the disappearance of James E. Tedford. Also, it's important to know that this particular area has had an incredibly high number of UFO sightings, so perhaps it's some kind of hotbed for extraterrestrial life. And along with this, some locals even believe that there are wormholes in the area, which could be responsible for the disappearances. Now, every logical bone in my body is telling me that this theory is not true, but the truth to it is that I can't fully disprove that theory, and nobody can. What I will say though is, wouldn't you think somebody would have seen a UFO swoop down and abduct somebody? Like that elderly couple who was walking behind the second victim. They probably would have noticed a spaceship. But you know what? If this theory isn't crazy enough, the next one is. The third theory is Bigfoot. Please don't unsubscribe. Many people believe that the legendary Bigfoot calls the Bennington Triangle its home, including one story from the 19th century when an 8-foot-tall, hairy creature emerged from the woods near a stagecoach. The creature charged the stagecoach, shoving it on its side and fleeing into the woods immediately after. This creature was originally called the Bennington Monster, but it fits the supposed profile of a modern-day Sasquatch. Oh God. Believing in Sasquatch is one thing. I will not judge for that, because it's one of those things, you can't disprove it. That doesn't mean it's responsible for these disappearances. The hunters would have heard Rivers scream. The elderly couple would have heard screaming. The people on the bus would have seen Sasquatch. They would have seen the damn thing, right? Now, this next theory is one that I believe, and it also happens to be the most boring one. But here it goes. The theory is that none of these disappearances had anything to do with each other. Now, I believe that the Bennington Triangle has some bad juju to it. However, I don't necessarily fully believe that these cases are connected. Literally, the only correlation between these cases is the fact that they all, at first, disappeared without a trace. Which, yes, is kind of a big correlation, but it doesn't prove anything. You can go down the list, and there are theories that can be offered for each case. Middle Rivers was accidentally killed by the 4 hunters, and they covered it up. Paula Jean Weldon ran off to Canada with her boyfriend. James E. Tedford was mistaken for another man on the bus. Paul Jepson was kidnapped on the highway or killed by his mom. And Frieda was lost or killed by her cousin or some animal in the woods. And I think maybe the reason that these disappearances were never solved was because of this horrible police force they had, or lack thereof, which led to every investigation being totally botched. Now, this is a theory that I want to believe, but this is a case where the most logical reasons end up sounding the craziest. The Bennington Triangle is a mysterious place, and to this day there are still disappearances and strange occurrences. And no matter what you believe the reasons are for these occurrences, there's no denying that there's something extremely dark going on in the Bennington Triangle.